Sunday school leader. April is over, isn't it? That means that our year is 1/3 of the way through, which means, what do we have, about 8 months left till Christmas. Isn't that exciting? I know it is, isn't it? Hey, remember we're in the unit that's entitled Stand Up, How to Fight Injustice. We are in week 3. The title of this lesson is called Stand Down, out of Esther chapter 4, verses 1 through 3 and 10 through 16. And the point of the lesson is surrendering to God leads to greater things. So the title of this week's lesson is actually an oxymoron. Did you ever think about that? Stand down. Standing implies getting up. Stand down. Anyway, I guess it's just maybe my mind that works like that. And also, stand down, we're talking about fighting injustice. I thought we were supposed to stand up against injustice. Well, we'll see throughout this lesson that there is a right time to stand up. And sometimes we need to stand back, stand down, and wait for God's timing. That's what we're going to see this week. Now, when we last left the Esther and Mordecai story, we saw that King Xerxes had proclaimed to everyone that they should bow down and give honor to Haman. And Mordecai refused to do that. And so Haman devised this plan. He was going to kill not only Mordecai, but kill all the Jews in the kingdom. And so we can look back in Esther chapter 3, verses 12 through 15, and we see that Haman summoned the king's scribes. And he wrote letters to all the provinces, all the heads of the provinces there in the empire. And the edict was on a certain date you were going to round up and kill all of the Jews. Men, women, children, young, old. When this was written, it was the 13th day of the first month. Okay? Now, we're talking about a Jewish calendar here, not our calendar. 13th day of the first month. When the rounding up and murder was going to happen, it was supposed to be the 13th day of the 12th month. Well, let's look at the Jewish calendar. Okay, most Hebrew months have about 30 days, and the 13th day is approximately the middle of the month. So the 13th day of the first month, when this edict was written, was around the end of March, and the 13th day of the 12th month would be around the end of February or the 1st of March of our calendar. So it's almost a whole year in the making, about 11 of our months. Okay, so the question is, why wait so long? All right, well, let's look at a map of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was massive, and you had to give time to get the word out. There was really no such thing as instant communication. Instant communication would, I guess, be hand-delivered message on horseback. And it would take time to identify the people that's going to be rounded up and prepare all this. And also, it would probably give the Jewish folks a little time to realize what's going to happen. And it was kind of a way of torturing them to know that on this certain day they were going to die. So that leads us to today's lesson text. And so Mordecai hears of this edict. And what does he do? Well, first of all, he tears his clothes. And we've talked about this before several months ago in another lesson, that was a Hebrew way, a Jewish way of showing deep remorse, deep sadness, that they would rip their clothes. The lesson I referred to, or the instance I was referring to several months ago, I think I showed a video clip of somewhere around 1980, 81, the jazz singer with Neil Diamond, and how his father did that, tore his clothes when he realized that his son, Neil Diamond, was living with this girl. Anyway, all that to say that Mordecai was deeply moved by this. Of course, his impending death is almost a year away. So he tears his clothes, and then what else does he do? Put on sackcloth and ashes. Now, this was an outward sign of an inward emotion. We think of that as baptism, don't we? An outward sign of an inward decision. This was an outward sign of an inward emotion. They were showing, by putting on this sackcloth, which was a coarse material, it was usually made out of black goat's hair, quite uncomfortable. And for some reason, I've always pictured this kind of like a burlap bag. That coarse brown material that would be itchy. And that's kind of how I've always pictured it. And anyway, so they put on this clothing that was very uncomfortable, and then being in ashes, that signified an utter desolation. So Mordecai must have realized that this edict of killing all the Jews was because of him. So not only was he going to die, but all of the Jews were going to be executed. We see in verse 3 that there was fasting, weeping, lamenting. Sackcloth and ashes were worn throughout the empire as Jews learned of their fate. Now we got to remember, Esther is queen now. Remember, she is Mordecai's cousin. She learns about what Mordecai is doing. She learns about the sackcloth and ashes, and so she sends him some clothes. Here, put these on. Make yourself comfortable, and he won't take them. So Esther summons a eunuch by the name of Hathach, and he's going to be the go-between messenger. She's going to give him a message. He goes and tells Mordecai. Mordecai replies, so he runs back. All right. So she sends this eunuch, Hathach, to see what's going on. He returns back to Esther and reports about this edict. And that's where we pick up in our text today, down in verse 10. This kind of takes me back to my junior high school days of passing notes back and forth and not giving them directly to the person, but you'd give them to the in-between person, the go-between, the mediator. Give this to so-and-so, and then they'd give it to so-and-so, and then they would reply and give it back, and anyway. All right, so Esther tells the eunuch this. Everyone knows that if you approach the king, doesn't matter who you are, if you approach the king without being summoned, you have an automatic death sentence. You just can't approach the king. The only exception is if he takes his scepter and kind of points it to you, extends the golden scepter toward you. It's kind of like the nod of approval. Yes, you can approach me. If he doesn't do that, you're dead. And so she continues to say, it's been 30 days since I've been summoned to the king. And I think what she's saying here is that, even I, as queen, I can't approach the king without being summoned by him. Hey, remember the first queen here in the story back in Esther chapter 1, Queen Vashti? She didn't show up at a banquet that Xerxes had commanded her to be at. And she was stripped of her royal status and even banished from ever approaching or coming before the king again. So, hey, cousin Mordecai, I really don't have any pull in this situation. So Mordecai sends back a reply through this eunuch back to Esther. And, our text here doesn't explicitly say this, but I think that Mordecai is going to use Esther's logic against her. Esther's saying even the queen can be punished. And so Mordecai replies to her and says, yeah, true, the queen is not exempt from punishment. So this punishment of killing all the Jews is going to be for you as well, since you are Jewish. And not just you, but you and your whole family. And so deliverance is going to have to come from someone else. But besides Esther, you may have been placed in this very position, this high position, for such a time as this. Now, those words must have hit home with Esther, because she replied back to Mordecai through the eunuch, gather up all the Jews in this town of Susa, and do a complete fast. Now, what's a complete fast? That's no eating, not even any drinking at all. No eating, no drinking, no intake of nourishment for 3 days. You see, fasting was more than just going hungry. It involved seeking God. It involved prayer. So she said, do that. I myself and my attendants, we're going to do the same thing for 3 days. Then I will approach the king. And if he kills me, so be it. So what does Esther show here? First of all, she shows the importance of seeking God before taking action. Right? She just didn't storm into the king's chambers and demand an audience with him. No. She's going to seek God first. Also, she shows the importance of involving the community of faith, and not just being a lone ranger in this fight against injustice. She also shows the importance of doing right regardless of the personal consequence. She said, if I perish, I perish. Now, I believe she figured she was going to die either way, right? The edict came down, and if that was carried out, she was going to die. If she approaches the king and he doesn't extend the scepter, she's going to die. there's a small chance that he might extend that scepter and that she could have that audience with the king. So that's the best bet of her surviving. All right. This is also, to me, this is kind of similar to the attitude of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They said, we know that God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down to your gods, King Nebuchadnezzar. So Esther resigned herself to God's ultimate will. Now, I know she knew God could not be manipulated, right? It's not like, okay, we're going to do this fast for 3 days, and then God has to come in and miraculously deliver us. That's not the point. Okay, remember the lesson title is what? Stand down. And the point is that surrendering to God leads to greater things. See, God's timing is also part of God's will, isn't it? We can do the right thing, but do it at the wrong time. So, like I said before, Esther didn't immediately, when she heard this, didn't immediately storm into the king's chambers and then demand an audience with him right then and there. She didn't do that. Likewise, we need to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit's leading, whether that's taking a stand against injustice. I think even in witnessing, I think there's sometimes the right thing to do at the wrong time. All right, so next week we're going to continue on in this saga, the soap opera, so to speak. We're going to be looking at standing with humility. I'm going to be out of Esther chapter 5. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to pray for your class.